Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. It is currently about a week on from when this training session was recorded, believe it or not. So this was last week's posterior session recorded on Wednesday, and it is currently a Tuesday here in Australia as I do the voiceover. And I figured instead of doing the usual voiceover where I just go over and go through the actual training footage itself and how the session went and felt, that I would instead provide you with some value by giving you some hamstring training pointers and tips and I suppose nuggets of advice that I've learnt over the years and implemented in my own training to expedite and improve my rate of hamstring progression and growth. Because whether you know it or not, hamstrings are definitely a weak point and a lagging body part of mine, and it's something that I've had to put a lot of time and attention to detail in order to see any return when it comes to muscle growth. And I figured if anybody out there is like me and struggles with hamstring development, then this might in fact help you out. And if it does, definitely let me know. I really hope it does help some people out there, and it also will provide a little bit of insight into, I suppose, my thought process when it comes to training hamstrings specifically, but also any body part. Because really, you can apply this to any lagging body part and it's going to help you. But I figured I'd quickly touch on the first thing, which is why I'm training calves at the start of this session. Because obviously, like I said, this is a posterior session, hamstring back session, but I also do calves in this session because I train calves 3 times a week, once on my arm day, and then again on both of my lower body focus days. The first one being this hamstring back session, and the second one being a full lower body session where I target every lower body muscle. But I always train calves at the start of the lower body sessions, and the reason for that is I find if I tag it onto the end of the session, I'm going into the calf training maximally exhausted, or at least in my maximally exhausted state, and then I see a diminished return on investment in terms of the quality of the training that I'm able to achieve for that muscle group, for that body part, in this case calves. So since moving my calf training to the start of my sessions, I've noticed an improvement in the rate of progression as well as the rate of growth, and so until that changes, I'm going to keep things the way they are. But with that said and that out of the way, let's dive into the actual hamstring training tips. And the first training tip I have is one of controlling the movement. And this is something that I was very guilty of when I first started lifting. For the first, I'd say, 3 years of lifting consistently and seriously, I did not control the movement very well. I'd just go through the motions. I wasn't really paying attention to making the reps standardized or trying to make the reps as identical as possible, and that was to my own detriment, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get the most out of a movement, despite what that exercise is for, whether it's for your hamstrings, your biceps, your shoulders. And if you have a lagging body part, you can probably learn a lot from just how you're training in regards to the mistakes you're making, because yes, genetics play a role, and yes, genetics will govern whether a body part responds very effectively or not so effectively to training stimulus, but genetics outside of the equation or removed from the equation, the only other thing that's going to dictate how well or how poorly a muscle develops and grows is your ability to get a connection with that muscle and to train it effectively. And a lot of that will be dictated and governed by the quality of the reps performed and the quality of training that body part. So if you're just going through the motions like I was when you started lifting and just not really standardizing the reps or controlling the speed or the tempo, then you're probably missing out on a lot of gains and leaving a lot of potential progress on the plate, so to speak. So tidying up your technique, controlling the tempo, adding a slight pause in the squeeze and the stretch position of each rep on the hamstring curls can help you capitalize on better results and better progress, and therefore better muscle growth over time, because you're able to be fully present in the moment, fully present in the actual exercise that you're doing. And I always try emphasize a slight 1 second pause at the top and the bottom of each rep, and that really does help me improve the stimulus that I feel in the hamstring, and also the ability to accurately gauge progression over time. Because if you're just getting more reps each week, it doesn't necessarily mean you're progressing. You need to be keeping the rep quality the same. If you're, say, doing 13 reps in week 1 and then week 2 you're doing 14 reps, that might be all and well and good, but only in the instance that you're keeping your technique consistent from week to week. If your technique's getting sloppier each week as you add an extra rep to that working set, then you're not actually progressing. You're in denial. You're tricking yourself that you're progressing. You're tricking yourself into thinking you're making progress when you're actually not. You need to keep the reps identical, keep the form or the technique strict, not super strict, but relatively strict, to the point that you can accurately and confidently say, okay, I hit a PB this week, and not just, oh, I got an extra rep, but my technique was sloppy. So that is the first tip that I have when it comes to hamstring training. And you can, again, apply this to any muscle group and it's going to be applicable. Then the other tip that I have is range of motion. And this is closely tied to controlling the movement and performing it well. But doing a shorter range of motion is just going to give you a smaller return on investment when it comes to muscle growth in almost every scenario. So you can see and notice here that every rep I'm trying to touch the pad onto the back of my legs, and if I don't manage to touch it onto the back of my legs, I don't count it as a rep. So try really maximize the range of motion, get a full stretch at the end, or at the start of, I should say, of the movement with hamstring curls and remaining deadlifts, and then a full shortening at the bottom of a hamstring curl. So that way you're obviously maximally stretching, lengthening, and maximally shortening the muscle. Now, the next tip I have for you when it comes to hamstring training is not avoiding hip hinges. And as you can see here, I'm doing a Romanian deadlift. You don't have to do a barbell Romanian deadlift, but some sort of hip hinge I think is crucial and a non-negotiable in good hamstring training. And when it comes to getting hamstring growth, you want to be doing one hip hinge variation at least throughout the week. For me, I'm doing the barbell Romanian deadlift, but you can do a Smith machine Romanian deadlift if you say you've got pre-existing injuries that you're concerned with flaring up from doing barbell movements and things of that nature, or if you just get a better mind to muscle connection when doing a Smith machine Romanian deadlift, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I actually rotate between the barbell Romanian deadlift and the Smith machine Romanian deadlift. For a few blocks I'll use one, then I'll integrate the other in place of it, and then once that becomes stale, I'll rotate them back around. Now, when it comes to maximizing hamstring development, I think having a heavy hip hinge incorporated somewhere throughout your week of training is essential and not negotiable. Now, there is a perfectly good reason as to why that is the case, and it has a lot to do with the hamstring anatomy itself. So if we look at the hamstring as a muscle group, it's made up of 4 different muscles. You've got the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, the biceps femoris short head, and the biceps femoris long head. So the first 3 of those 4 muscles that I just listed and named there are what you would call biarticulate. So they act over 2 different joints in the body. They're involved in the movement of 2 different joints, the hip joint and the knee joint. And that's because those 3 of those 4 muscles all attach or originate from the pelvis or the hip bone, and then they run down past the hip bone, past the knee bone, and attach onto the tibia, which is the inner shin bone. So they originate at the pelvis and insert at the shin bone, and therefore, because they're running over 2 different joints in the body, in order to effectively target them, you need to be actioning those 2 joints. And that's why a Romanian deadlift is superior and I would argue necessary in fully maximizing hamstring development over time in your training, as opposed to not having one in there. Like seated hamstring curls and lying hamstring curls, for example, are fantastic for maximally stimulating and recruiting the 4th muscle in the hamstrings that I listed before, the biceps femoris long head. But for the other 3, you do require some sort of hip hinge movement to effectively load that. So a Romanian deadlift, whether it be a dumbbell Romanian deadlift, a barbell Romanian deadlift, a Smith machine Romanian deadlift, whatever tickles your fancy, find a hip hinge that you can perform effectively and safely, progress on over time, and get a relatively good mind to muscle connection with, and you're pretty much set. Do that, and then do 1 or 2 hamstring isolation movements. I use that term very lightly, but do 1 or 2 hamstring curl movements throughout the week in addition to a heavy hip hinge, and you're pretty much set when it comes to hamstring development. So my tip is to just make sure you don't avoid hip hinges. They are very, very important. And I think the fact that I come from a powerlifting background and I did quite a lot of hinging in my later years of lifting before transitioning to bodybuilding has a lot to do with the reason why I was able to make some progress in my hamstrings in spite of the fact that they're a genetic weak point for me. So definitely don't skip your hinging. Make sure that you're putting as much effort into your hinging as you are your bicep curls, and I can assure you that your hamstrings will definitely thank you for it and respond in a positive manner. Now the last tip I wanted to finish up on with here is the one of volume. Now when it comes to training volume, people either do too much or too little. They very seldom do they hit that sweet spot, and if you're doing too much volume, you're not going to grow effectively. If you're doing too little volume, you're not going to grow effectively. If you're doing too much volume, you're probably going to end up injuring yourself. If you're doing too little volume, you're probably never going to feel muscle soreness, and you're probably just never going to see any sort of positive change in your hamstring development. So if you're not seeing any change in your hamstring development and you're not having any issues with excessive muscle soreness or any niggles occurring, then you're probably not doing enough work for your hamstrings. But the same token, if you're doing too much, you're probably going to notice that you're starting to develop pains and discomforts and things like that, in which case you just need to tone and dial back your training volume. But it's a matter of finding that sweet spot, and that sweet spot is largely a floating target. It's going to change depending on a number of variables. So don't think just because you've found it now that you've found it indefinitely, because down the track you might find, hey, my sleep's improved a lot, my nutrition's improved a lot, I'm not dieting anymore, I'm in a bit of a surplus, and all of a sudden your ability and capacity for training volume goes up. You're able to handle more volume and positively respond to, adapt to, and grow from doing more volume. Whereas if your sleep's very dismal, it's in the gutter, so to speak, and if you're in a calorie deficit, that sort of thing, or if you're just at maintenance, then your ability to handle training volume is going to be much lower. So you've got to consider things, variables like that do affect and influence your tolerance for training volume, and base your training volume off of that. So if you know you're not recovering very well, then you might have to dial your volume back a bit in order to still progress at a slow rate. Whereas if you know you're getting really good sleep, you're getting a very good intake of calories and micronutrients, and say, for example, maybe you've decided to go to the dark side and start using performance enhancing drugs, then your ability to handle training volume is going to go up quite a lot. In which case you probably want to be doing a little bit more work to see the return on investment that you want to make from doing so. So that concludes my training advice when it comes to training hamstrings. And like I said, or at least alluded to at the beginning of the video, guys, these tips and pointers are kind of universal across the board for every body part. It's not exclusive to hamstrings, but you can think of it as advice that you really want to take on board for your weak or lagging body part, whatever that might be, whether it be your arms, your hamstrings, your back, your chest, your delts. If you've got a lagging body part, you just really need to refine and dial in all the training variables to see the results that you want to see. It's that simple. And a lot of the time, it might not even be a case of it's a genetic weak point. It might just be a case of you're just very bad at targeting that muscle, or very bad at getting a good connection with that muscle when you're training, and simply just improving that alone is a lot of the times enough to see an improved rate of progression and improved rate of muscle growth. So take from it what you will, but hopefully you who's listening, or somebody else who's listening, can benefit from what I've shared in this video. And if you did enjoy the video, if you did find the content useful and you'd like to support me and give back to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a like, and comment down below what you would like to see in the future. And I will see you in the next video, guys. But until then, stay strong, stay safe, and yeah, I'll wrap up the voiceover here, and you can just watch the remainder of the video, however long there is left. I don't think there's much left. A little bit of posing after this clip, and that's it. But yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.